Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to Breaking Silos. My guest today needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Today I'm joined by Eddie Francis, who you may know. Eddie is a brand strategist and principal at Edify Ventures, a consultancy focused on personal and employer branding. He's also a longtime higher ed marcomm leader and has background in HR and talent acquisition, which will be important for this conversation. And he's the host of I Want to Work There on Enrollify, as well as the podcast titled For Our Edification, a personal leadership podcast. Eddie, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Shane, man, thank you so much. It's an Enrollify crossover.
I was going to let you handle that the whole time.
I am forever grateful to Dave Kibbles for doing that on my podcast.
Love it. I love it. So Eddie, we're going to talk about silos today from a couple of standpoints, but I really want to talk with you about your conversations with leaders on the employer branding side of things. And I want to start with just your kind of general thoughts on silos and experience addressing them from your background as a marcomm leader and as an HR talent acquisition professional, and talk about why they have such an impact on institutions and employers.
You know, I came to higher ed from the private sector. And so when I got to higher ed, there was just stuff I didn't understand. I would sit there in my office and look around and go, are we really having this problem? Why is this a problem? I had this conversation. So my wife works in higher ed as well. She's the director of the John Lewis Public Administration Program at Tulane University. Yeah. And we had this conversation literally the other day when I said, you know, one of the things that has occurred to me, and this came up on one of my podcast episodes, that occurred to me is that in higher ed, you have people who are incredibly accomplished and mission focused. However, there is a lot of focus on individual accomplishment. In the private sector, you have that. But in the private sector, when you don't do good teamwork, you pay for it. You really pay for it. And the private sector is much quicker to act on stuff. And they're much quicker to say, listen, if you can't do this teamwork, you are on a performance improvement plan. And if you can't get it done, then you need to start looking at another job. You have 90 days. And that's it. There's just there are no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And I think with higher ed, I think one of the reasons we run into some of the issues we run into and why there is so much of a silo environment is you have that individual mindset a lot of times, this individual accomplishment mindset. In the marketing and communications area, I remember, literally walking around campus at one campus, introducing myself and people telling me, oh man, it's really nice that you came to visit me because nobody from marketing and communications has ever come to my office. And I'm going, what do you mean nobody's ever come here? Why would I not come to your office? I mean, it's my job to, really serve the campus and to help you and to really develop strategies. And I just didn't get it. But there were these people literally sitting in their individual areas. And I'll tell you, Shane, I will say that when I came into marcomm, I did not come in with a strategy mindset. I really came in like a lot of us do. I came in with an order taker mindset. And so the siloing really hit me when I was taking orders from all these different areas of campus and all these different units. And sometimes people were asking for the exact same thing at the same time. And I'm going, well, wait a minute. So-and-so just asked me for the same thing. You didn't talk about this? And the answer was almost always, no, we didn't talk about it. And then I would dig deeper to ask, well, why are we not communicating? Because you're about to do the same kind of event The psychology department is about to do the same kind of event that the, I don't know, HR is about to do. Like, you're both doing a growth mindset event. And so why are you doing it in the same week, almost like literally one building away? Why are you doing the same thing? And nobody ever had a really good answer for that. And then I would find out that part of the issue was that there were people who had problems with one another and they would not resolve the problem. And again, in the private sector, that is not something that goes over well with a lot of CEOs. It doesn't go over well with a lot of middle management people. If you have a problem with somebody, you need to figure out how to resolve it and resolve it quickly because we got money to make. That's the that's the private sector's attitude.
Yeah.
And it's like, and if you do anything to threaten his bottom line, you are gone. So if not talking to someone threatens the bottom line, you can best believe, Shane, you are gone. and higher ed just doesn't perform the same way. I don't know how much that addresses what you were asking, but those are some of the early observations I had coming from the private sector. It was stuff to me that was really shocking. And I don't want to be the proverbial critic here or the chronic critic here, but I remember sitting every place I've worked. I remember sitting there asking myself, "How do we keep the doors open?" because there was just stuff that just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and it does address it. And I think a little bit of a rant here from me, but I think one of the points you made about relationships getting in the way. I think sometimes we, as marketers and in general higher ed professionals, we kind of have a complacency about the way we operate. We've kind of resigned to the fact that, things take forever. We move at a glacial pace. Well, that's on us too. I mean, we have goals that we need to accomplish, and it's up to us to push that forward and push the envelope if needed. And I think, letting something like a personal, whatever about this person that you don't like or you don't work well with, letting that get in the way can cause problems. You mentioned keeping the doors open. We're seeing colleges close weekly, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't have time to be in these siloed environments because it could very well be anybody listening to this could be next in terms of that college closure. So we have a responsibility to address this personally.
I went in, I came to higher ed as a maverick, basically, because one thing that I have recognized over the course of time is that when you come from the marketing and communication side of the house, you are not risk averse at all. As a matter of fact, it's our job to take risks. We have to take risks. There's no progress without risks. But higher ed overall is a very risk averse environment. And when you talk about things moving at a glacial pace and having to take things over. So one of the universities where I worked, I actually created the logo for the institution because they had never had one before. And so I went in and I was actually putting a press release together and I was like, "Hey, where's the letterhead?" And it was just some stuff typed out. And I was like, "No, seriously, where's the letterhead?" And it was just this regular looking stuff. I said, "Great. Well, there's this press release going out," and someone commented to me, "Hey, I really never knew what this institution's logo was." And I was like, "Yeah, where's the logo?" So they showed me something and I said, "No, that is not the logo. Please tell me that's not it." I got really impatient about it. And I put together these focus group discussions with students, and the students were the main part of the discussion because one of the pieces of feedback I got back from students very early on was nobody listens to us. So I did a student-heavy series of focus group discussions. There were faculty, staff, alumni involved, but I really wanted the students to have some buy-in. And by the fourth month, or within 4 months, I developed a logo. I literally sat on Adobe one night and I taught myself Photoshop and I put the logo together and then I kicked it out and I sent out an email to the entire campus saying, "Okay, vote on these logos." The chancellor got upset and the chancellor goes, who okayed this? And so my boss comes to me and she goes, "Okay, he wants to know how this became okay." I said, "Listen, I don't have time to wait until 3 years from now to do a logo. And people are asking us for logos. We're involved in events and people keep asking us for logos. This is an important part of our identity as an institution." I said, "Now there's some other stuff we'll get to." I said, "But a simple logo?" I said, "It's just a logo. Yeah. All we need is a logo." And so, but I knew, Shane, that I did the right thing by forcing it down the university's throat when a student came to me and said, "Mr. Francis, I want that on a t-shirt." And I said, "Okay, that's what I was looking for." I was looking for the student buy-in. And then alumni started coming to me and saying, "Did you create that?" I said, "Yeah, I did that. Thank you so much. Now I feel like we feel like a university now. I'm proud of my alma mater." And to me, that was all worth the chancellor being upset. That was all worth it. And so to your point, in Marcom, we have to push the envelope and we have to push the issue a lot of times in order to get results.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of really pushing that envelope and saying, we've got to do this or else. And so, I think you and I, we were just at a conference together not long ago. We go to conferences and things. I would say one of the biggest frustrations I hear from peers is silos and inability to get things done, and we feel like we're spinning our wheels. So talk about from a recruitment and retention standpoint, from a talent standpoint, why silos can really be harmful to an institution's culture and have a negative impact on recruitment and retention of employees.
I'm actually going to borrow from my wife on this, Dr. Halima Malik Francis, and she has actually researched this stuff. She runs a public administration program, but part of her background also is philanthropy. And one of the things that she talks about is the importance of cross-sector collaboration in cities and towns. So you have the government sector, you have the business sector, but you also have the nonprofit sector. And a lot of times when people ignore the nonprofit sector, they ignore that part that can really help fill in some gaps, so some very valuable gaps to serve the citizens. I say this all the time. I see campuses as small cities. And so what is the cross-sector collaboration that needs to happen within a college or a university? And so having this siloed attitude really hurts an institution, because when you don't have academic affairs talking to finance, and you don't have finance talking to marketing, and marketing isn't talking to facilities, some people look at those 4 areas and say, well, those are 4 different areas. Well, no, there's a lot that happens when those conversations aren't happening, and bad things happen when those conversations don't happen in those areas. And one of the attitudes that I hear a lot in higher ed is not my job. Again, in the private sector, those are 3 really bad words. You do not tell people not my job in the private sector, because the effects of that are felt very quickly across the company. So, so in higher ed, the siloed attitude really threatens our progress a lot of times, because it's the old adage, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And when the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, then one thing that happens is that it's easy for your competition to pick you apart. That's the first thing, especially when the competition finds out that you operate in a siloed fashion and they operate a little bit better than you do, then it's easy for them to pick you apart. But then the other thing that happens is that when there simply is no communication from one unit to the next unit, you have duplication of services, which can hurt the institution. But then you also have simple things like events being scheduled against one another. And then and then what that does, Shane, and I know you've seen this melts away at trust. And so when people don't trust each other, people are working with one another. And then you have things like the institution overspending for technology, for example. You have one area using a CRM, you have another area using another CRM, and you're sitting there going, okay, you're both using 2 different CRMs. You're kind of doing the same thing. Actually, you are doing the same thing. Why do you have 2 separate systems? You have one area that has an enterprise account for virtual meetings. You have another area that has the same enterprise account for virtual meetings. And so the institution looks up 5 years later and they've overspent for a lot of services. They've overspent on technology. They've overspent on resources, all because everybody was working in silos and nobody wanted to talk to one another. And so I think those are some of the biggest threats. And I think that's why it's important for institutions to really take a good look at how they're operating in silos and to find a way to resolve that problem.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I mean, your point to duplicating services from a central marcomm role, this is something we see all the time. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
we've got 9 different people working with corporations for different partnerships, and we're
Oh, goodness. Yeah, so fundraising is a huge area. You would think I remember this with my wife being a fundraiser. But yeah, you're right. I mean, fundraising is a huge
yeah.
area with units stepping on one another's feet because they're all chasing the same dollar
Mhm.
from the same resource. Yeah, that's a huge, yeah.
So even things like that maybe not our marcomm's responsibility, we end up sort of being the leaders in that space because, as you mentioned, we're
Yeah.
getting the project requests and we're getting the emails incoming that says, I want to do this. I'm having this event on this date. And we're like, wait a minute. So is this person
Yeah.
from this part of campus? How can we address this? And actually, I want to talk to you next about leadership in that process,
Mm-hmm.
specifically cabinet, specifically presidents. Why, first of all, why is it important for them to be aware of siloing? And if they
Mm-hmm.
are or are not, why is it? One of the themes that's come out in this first season of Breaking Silos is that these processes need to come from the top, right? So VPs of enrollment and marketing need to work together, advancement and marketing, president and
Yeah.
marketing. Why is that so important in terms of leading the charge and addressing silos?
One of the issues that I had was, one of the institutions where I worked, I had an issue with admissions. Like I sat in a meeting with them. They basically told me, yeah, go do this. Yeah, go do that. And I'm going, okay, but I have a question, when there are tours happening, what are your recruiters saying? And they're like, well, it's not a big deal. And I'm going, it's a very big
Mm.
deal what they're saying. I mean, I don't understand why that's not a big deal. And then someone tried to explain it away saying, well, tours aren't really the thing that really pulls people in. Now, this very same institution told me that when students visit the campus, that was the most important time for that institution because that's when students got it and understood where they were. So I'm going, wait, you're telling me 2 different things. And so, Shane, the big issue that we ran into was we had 2 leaders, me and, the person over admissions, who we were just not on the same page. And it was really hard for us to get on the same page because there was this insistence that basically I needed to go back to my office and do my little flyers.
Mm.
And that was basically the attitude, right? And so that didn't set well with me at all. And so what was really apparent was, and I went back to my boss and I said, someone has got to set the tone for the culture of this place and how we're going to communicate. One of the other things I found with this place, and I'm going to really get into this answer with this. One of the things I found with this place is that they had redone their mission statement. They had revised their vision statement, but they did not have core values, institutional core values. I went to the cabinet and asked, I was like, why don't we have core values? And again, the answer was kind of, well, it's not that big a deal. And I'm going, that's a very big deal because core values are the language for how you operate and how you make decisions and how you behave. So basically, we are a rudderless ship right now. We are just kind of floating out there and we're just kind of hoping that some good stuff happens to us. So with that being said, this is where leadership is very important because leaders, they set the tone. They set the tone for the kind of culture that you're going to have on a campus. I had a really funny conversation with a former president once, and I was crazy about this person because, get this, became a president without having a doctorate, right? An MBA.
Wow.
Very good at her job, did her job extremely well. And one of the things that she said was, sometimes you just have to make the kids play together. and she said there were times I would have to call the vice president of academic affairs. I have to call the provost in my office, and I have to call the vice president of student affairs in my office and say, okay, you two play well together. And she said she literally would have to do that at times because she said they were just really hell-bent on doing things their way, silos, right? And so in that case, you had a leader who was saying, listen, this is the tone, this is the culture, this is what I want, this is how it's going to work, and this is what we need to do in order to survive as an institution. And I think for leaders, it's about being clear about the culture. It's about being clear about the values of the institution, the goals, the mission, being clear about what kind of community you have. And then also, the leaders, I think, have to be aware of how they communicate the state of the campus to folks. And that's why they're so important. When they communicate the state of the campus, they communicate expectations. They are very intentional about the kind of culture. And it's not up to the president. One of the things that I've seen from HBCUs and small institutions is that a lot of times they put way too much on the president. And they want the president to be the person to set the tone and culture. And that's not going to work because the president is only one person. The president needs a reliable cabinet. And the president needs to set these tones and these expectations to the cabinet. And they have to have cabinet people who are going to work with them to make sure that all of that stuff is set and is implemented and is carried out. And so the cabinet they really have to be supporters of the president and the president's vision in a lot of these cases, or in these cases. And that's why it's just so important and cascading those expectations down to the deans or down to the unit leaders on the business side of the house. Yeah. But it definitely starts, I think, Shane, when you have leaders who you need them to break the silo. I think it's very important for them to be aware of tone and culture and expectations and values so that they can make sure that folks are working together in some capacity.
Hey there, it's Mallory, Chief Strategist of Enrollify. Higher ed is facing a leadership crisis. The demands on today's college and university leaders are skyrocketing, and talent is leaving the industry at an unprecedented rate. New leaders like you are emerging, but no one is getting the proper training to be successful. Well, Enrollify is here to change that. Our new course, Lessons in Leadership, taught by Dr. Carrie Phillips, will prepare you to be a confident, empathetic, and effective leader. From systems thinking to adaptive leadership, building culture to handling difficult decisions, this comprehensive online course is perfect for new and aspiring leaders. Don't wait. The course starts September 9th, and for a lucky group of 26 students, we have the option to add interactive sessions with Dr. Phillips for personalized guidance. Visit Enrollify.org to learn more.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm pretty fortunate to work at an institution at Muhlenberg College where our president, Kathy Herring, does a really nice job of kind of laying out that message to cabinet, and then her cabinet, by proxy, being the ones that are leading the charge in terms of breaking silos. We're a small team. We're a small institution. And I think we do a really nice job of collaborating, but it's really being led by leadership. But what I want to ask you about is for people who might not find themselves in that situation where there's frustration, maybe the cabinet isn't doing that, for more junior level or mid-career marcomm professionals and beyond marcomm, what are some approaches that we all can take in terms of breaking silos on our own across campus and really leading the charge of kind of creating that collaborative culture?
Yeah, this is one of those things. This is one of those skills I really wish I perfected before I left campus life. But I think really understanding how to be diplomatic and really understanding how to build consensus is really important. And this is where I think a lot of marcomm folks need to realize their leadership skills. One thing I see happening in the marcomm area in higher ed is that the conversation about marcomm leaders as leaders, that conversation is picking up and is really getting a lot of steam. And I think that for marcomm people, so let's take the example of, what I mentioned a little earlier. The psychology department wants to do a growth mindset thing. HR wants to do a growth mindset thing. They schedule it on the same day. For marcomm, instead of raising it as a complaint, I think raising it as a concern, but then also coming to the table with a solution before that conversation even begins. So whoever the boss is, whoever your boss is, before you go to him and say, "Oh, what in the world are they doing?" Rah, 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 rah. Going to him and saying, "Okay, listen, here's what we have going on. Here's what I think should happen. And by the way, next time, here's a conversation that needs to happen. And how can we get how can we get people on the same page? And I think taking that strategic approach, but then also that conflict resolution approach, I think is really, really important for marcomm. And I do think that a lot of marcomm folks, even people who are not leaders, even people who are the support staff in marcomm, I would encourage, when I was last a marcomm director, I would encourage people on my team to have a leadership attitude. And one of the things I would talk to them about is flexing their expertise authority. I would talk to them about how you, social media coordinator, you are the queen of social media here. That means even you tell me when I don't know what's happening with social media. And she did that. And there were so many times she would come to me with a suggestion and I'm going, why should we do this? And then she'll tell me, and I'm going, oh, great, go for it. Let's do it. Right. And that took so much pressure off of me. But then when she had a rationale and she had a solution, it was easier for me to communicate that to leadership. When they were saying, well, why do we do this on social media? I just saw this post and it looked really weird. What's that about? And that made it a lot easier for me to give them an answer that would make a lot of sense. So I think for marcomm in particular, being diplomatic, having a conflict resolution mindset, owning the expertise authority, owning your expertise in what it is that you do. But then another thing, and I've seen a lot of this, and I've heard a lot of this in the marcomm, higher ed marcomm circles, and that is also being a marcomm educator, going to folks and teaching them what the field is and what it's about. Because I think for me, well, I'm going to speak for myself when I say this. I got past the frustration of order taker. I had a hard time getting past the frustration of order taker to get to that point where I could be an educator and to really show people what the field was about and what we were doing. But then also being familiar with the latest trends so that you could tell people, hey, listen, okay, I know you think this is what we do in marcomm, but let me tell you where marcomm is headed. And let me tell you what the next thing is in marcomm. And I think taking on those stances and being able to have those skills, I think those are some of the things that marcomm can do to really play a role in silo breaking.
Yeah, I love that. Leaning into expertise is a great tip. Mm-hmm. It's a great tip for people looking to move up in an organization. It's also for any of the leaders listening. Listen to your experts. Listen to your writers. Listen to your social media professionals. Listen to your videographers, because we are hiring experts to be exactly that, experts. So I think that's a great point.
One of my favorite people is Dr. Norman Francis. He was the president of Xavier University of Louisiana for 46 years. And Dr. Francis said, I would hire people who know what they're doing and I would leave them alone because I can't do all that stuff. And it was that simple. He built a juggernaut at Xavier. Xavier is responsible for the most Black doctors in the country.
Wow. Yeah.
They have a bulk of creating Black doctors in this country. So the man built a juggernaut, and he knew what he was talking about when he said that. He's honestly still alive and kicking and doing his thing. He was not resting at all at 90-some years old. Wow. But yeah, Dr. Francis, he's one of my favorite people to talk to.
Yeah, if you can have a 46-year run as president, you're doing something right.
Either that or nobody else wants to.
It's true. This is true. So speaking of that, I would be remiss if we didn't shift gears to employer branding, because I want to work there. Listen to it on Enrollify is a podcast about employer branding. So Eddie, what are some of the trends that folks in higher ed should be on the lookout for? Whether they're looking to maybe climb the ladder within their own institution, or they might be testing the waters in what's a really competitive market at this moment.
Yeah, one of the big trends that I'm seeing in employer branding in higher ed is that more HR teams are hiring communications people in HR, which is a joy to see. I had the pleasure on one of my episodes of talking to a higher ed comms person. I'm saying an HR comms person named Emily Amthor at Saginaw Valley State University. And, her episode was really refreshing because she walked in and she was just really ready to help this institution develop an employer brand. Like she's hyper focused on it. And I think that's one of the big things. Being a comms person in HR is a big thing in employer branding. But then the other thing, I think for folks who are in graphic design, folks who are content marketers, I think a huge trend that people can really take advantage of right now is converting HR websites or microsites from one-page document storage, units.
If you're listening, I just put my head in my hands.
I was going to say, I really wish people could see the way you just put your head in your hand on that one. And trust me, I do the same thing. Shane and I are both bald. So yeah, we both, we both feel our heads a lot, when it comes to this. Because, yeah, I mean, this one-page document storage thing that people like to do with their HR pages, I see a lot of colleges and universities that are moving away from that, and they are starting to turn their microsites into talent centers, true talent centers, talent experience, talent retention, talent attraction. And a lot of institutions are actually separating them. So now you have an HR site that has all of the talent retention and talent experience stuff, but a separate recruitment site where you have the talent attraction. People are developing employer value propositions, which are, obviously are closely tied to the institutional value prop, but really explaining to folks why that institution is a great place to work. And so that's another big trend where people are starting to really focus on their EVPs. So those are three big trends, I think, in employer branding that we're seeing in higher ed that are really taking flight. But I really think the big one is having that comms person embedded in HR.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And so as we close out here, one of the things, again, I think that we hear at conferences a lot from our colleagues is that there's a talent crisis in higher ed, or at least a perceived talent crisis in higher ed. And I would argue that one of the things that higher ed does not do particularly well is attract talent.
Right.
We have not yet mastered the ability to attract and retain talent. So what are some factors at play there, and how should institutions maybe be thinking about or changing the way they go about talent acquisition and retention?
So, you know what? So I'm going to give you another perspective on that. Higher ed is attracting talent. Higher ed isn't doing a good job of recruiting the talent it needs. And so I think, because a lot of people still want to work in higher ed, the problem is the dam is leaking. And to your point about retaining talent, I mean, what is the Coupa HR employee retention survey from 23? 61% of the people who were surveyed want to leave higher ed for the private sector. That's a horrible number. That's a bad number. And so there is a legitimate talent crisis. And I think that higher ed, I say this all the time, higher ed has a hiring problem. And I think when we are talking solutions, I think number one, being intentional about who colleges and universities want to hire is number one. Just be intentional about it. Who do you really want? Don't just go for the superstar professor just because they're a superstar at the big university across the state. I mean, is that person really going to fit your campus? Is this really who you need? I know this person is on the national networks all the time, but do you really need that person at your campus? I actually spoke to someone who had an opportunity to have one of these superstar professors on their faculty. And they said, we interviewed him and I didn't see it. I didn't see it. It wasn't a fit. I just no. And people thought that this department chair was insane for passing on his professor. But it wound up paying off because, as it turns out, they found out that person was a headache, just one big headache. And so while that department chair didn't get the superstar, they actually wound up getting a very reliable faculty that the students loved. And at the end of the day, Shane, that's what we want. We want the students to love the people who are working at these institutions. And so I think one of the things that higher ed really needs to address, I think higher ed needs to address the lack of awareness in hiring practices. I think designing committees, when it comes to search committees, designing committees that focus on culture cultivation, not just culture fit. And that's a nod to Brittany King, who was on one of my episodes. She brought up this really fascinating point that when colleges and universities are looking at faculty and staff, take a look at the people who are going to help advance the culture of your institution. Yes, your culture is here. Who's going to take it to the next level? And what that's going to mean, though, is that's going to mean people are going to have to drop some egos at the door. And that means that folks are going to have to sit in on these search committees and say, okay, this person might be a much better history professor than you, Dr. So-and-so. Are you okay with that? and if Dr. So isn't okay with that, then the provost, then the department chair or the dean needs to have a conversation, because you can't stay stagnant or go backwards just because one person is in their feelings. And I see that happen so much in higher ed. And the other thing is, colleges and universities really need to understand recruitment strategies. What does that look like? Another trend that I am seeing, by the way, is I am seeing HR teams in higher ed hire actual recruiters for their staff. Now, the thing that goes on with that, though, I do know of one institution that hired a recruiter, but this person wasn't a recruiter. They actually had to learn to recruit on the job. And so professional development would be a big part of this, a big part of this equation. We have to drop this assumption that if you don't know what you're doing, you must not be good for the job. That was logical in 1991, but it's not logical in 2024. And so I think professional development also has to be a big part of the recipe as well for colleges and universities to really improve their hiring practices. But I think a big thing, Shane, is I think colleges and universities really need to focus on hiring practices. We have the 4 Ps, and there are the 3 additional Ps of physical space, processes, and people. And Tom Hayes from Xavier University in Ohio points out that people is a big part of that, because people are a big part of that, because colleges and universities have to make sure they have the right people doing the right jobs. I'm also going to make sure that I give a nod to Eric Reuter, who was on an episode and talked about human-centered design and what that looks like in higher ed. What does it look like, even though the job description says this and the person is doing that job, if that person has another skill set, or if they need to shift their responsibilities a little bit, let's be creative and let's find out how we can cater to that person's strength in the same position, so that you can get the most out of that person, and it can have a fulfilling experience. And the last thing I'm going to point out, and I think this is very important for colleges and universities and their hiring practices, and I know a lot of colleges and universities don't want to do it, but salary transparency is important. If it's a low salary, let people know. Let people know.
I remember your conversation with Jamie Hunt on this at Cup Wrap.
Yeah, man.
She had that viral post about some insultingly low salary.
Yeah, and they wanted a master's degree, and it was like $15 an hour. And I think the other thing is, while we're looking at that, I think we need to take a serious look at job descriptions. And if the job that you want someone to do does not require a master's degree, then for goodness sakes, please don't try to require a master's degree. And there are some professional positions on campus that honestly, you can get away with having somebody without a bachelor's as long as they know how to do the job. Fundraising comes to mind. I know some dynamite fundraisers who don't have bachelors, but if you put them in a seat and have them call people to raise money, they will raise that money.
Absolutely.
So what do you do? If you really need them to have a bachelor, then give them a passage to get a bachelor's from your university. Make it part of the compensation package. Not a discount, free.
Right.
So there are a lot of ways to really make a good employer branding gumbo for people, so that they can advance their institutions. And at the end of the day, like I always say on my podcast, they can have the right kind of people serving the students and getting the best results from the students.
Exactly. Yeah, I would. My 2 cents there that I would add as we wrap up is that in an upcoming episode, a couple weeks from now, I'm going to have 2 vice presidents for enrollment and marketing. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is why it's impossible to find somebody that's an expert in both of those things. They're 2 different disciplines. Marketing and enrollment management are 2 different things.
I like it.
So if you're looking for somebody that's an expert and the absolute top of their game in both of those fields, you'll never find them. So giving people that flexibility to say, hey, I'm an enrollment expert, I'm not a marketing expert. Am I going to have the ability to hire a really solid marketing expert?
I think that's a great
If not, you're just looking for a unicorn.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, man, because I know you got to close out. But I think this attitude that higher ed has of always looking for a Swiss Army knife. Yeah, I mean, when it looks good, it looks great. But when it fails really bad. And so you're right. A lot of times when you're asking people to do this stuff, you are looking for a unicorn, especially I know people want to put fundraising and communications together so many times. It's not the best idea. It really isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. My hot take on higher ed marketing is that every institution should have a CMO and a CCO with those exact titles.
Yes.
Probably will never happen, but it should.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's done it. We just have to find it out of the nearly 4,000 colleges and universities. We just got to find who's done it already.
Yeah. Right. Well, Eddie, I appreciate your time here and your insights across the spectrum of silos and employer branding. Encourage everybody listening to look up Eddie. His LinkedIn will be in the show notes. Listen to his show, I Want to Work There, on Enrollify, and really reach out to him because he's one of the best people in general in higher ed. So I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate you, man.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Dave Builds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.